Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Friday, March 14th, 2025. All right, first thing, another reminder that it is fundraising season at antiwar.com. We started this just this week. And antiwar.com is 100% reader funded. So if you appreciate my work, if you like antiwar.com and you have the means, please consider helping us out and go to antiwar.com/donate to see the different ways that you can do that. We're a nonprofit, so it's tax deductible. That means it's less of your money that would go toward the war machine. The more you give us, the less that goes toward funding wars. Think of it like that. So again, antiwar.com/donate if you can help us out. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today, the DOJ sends an anti-Semitism task force to U.S. cities. So the U.S. Department of Justice said Thursday that its recently created federal task force to combat anti-Semitism will be heading to 4 U.S. cities as part of the Trump administration's broad crackdown on college protests critical of Israel. The DOJ said the task force, led by attorney Leo Terrell, will be visiting the leadership of New York, Boston, Chicago, and Los Angeles to discuss, quote, their responses to incidents of anti-Semitism at schools and on college campuses in their cities over the last 2 years, end quote. So while the pro-Palestine protests that swept college campuses have been labeled anti-Semitic, it's always worth pointing this out. Many Jewish students and organizations have participated. Just on Thursday, there were protesters in support of Mahmoud Khalil from Jewish Voice for Peace. I believe they went into Trump Tower in New York City. A lot of Jewish students have come out to defend him at Columbia. So just this idea that these are anti-Semitic protests is just simply not true. These are protests against Israel's genocidal war on Gaza and U.S. support for that. And specifically, a lot of these protests have been focused on getting their colleges to divest from Israel. So the DOJ said that Terrell informed city leaders that he, quote, was aware of allegations that the schools in their respective cities may have failed to protect Jewish students from unlawful discrimination in potential violation of federal law, end quote. So Attorney General Pam Bondi accused officials of not taking enough action against the protests. She said, quote, too many elected officials chose not to stand up to a rising tide of anti-Semitism in our cities and campuses following the horrific events of October 7th, 2023. Actions have consequences. Inaction does too, end quote. So the DOJ, along with several other federal agencies, recently announced the cancellation of approximately $400 million in federal grants and contracts to Columbia University over claims of inaction in the face of persistent harassment of Jewish students, even though Columbia has taken a heavy hand against students critical of Israel. And I linked to an article from DropSite News there about Columbia University's secret disciplinary process for students who are critical of Israel. Again, Columbia is really, cracked down on these students. But they're the ones who got their federal funding taken away. It really seems like these opening shots that the Trump administration is doing with this crackdown on these protests, they're going big, it seems like, I think, just to scare, for the chilling effect, to discourage people from participating in these protests, and to discourage colleges from letting them happen at all. So the federal agencies said that the grants were being canceled in light of ongoing investigations under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which the agencies are likely enforcing using a definition of anti-Semitism that includes criticism of the state of Israel. So back in 2019, I've gone over this before, but I think it's really important to understand, and this is why this is important for us at antiwar.com, because they're trying to make it illegal to criticize Israel. So back in 2019, President Trump signed an executive order directing all executive departments to consider the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's definition of anti-Semitism and the organization's list of examples of contemporary anti-Semitism when enforcing Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. The IHRA's examples of contemporary anti-Semitism include drawing comparisons of contemporary Israeli policy to that of the Nazis. It also lists applying double standards to Israel by requiring of it a behavior not expected or demanded of any other democratic nation, and denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination by claiming that the existence of a state of Israel is a racist endeavor. Civil liberty groups have sounded the alarm about the administration's crackdown on pro-Palestine protests, including the effort to deport Mahmoud Khalil, a green card holder arrested by ICE over the weekend for his role in protests at Columbia. Khalil has not been accused of a crime. He hasn't been accused of a crime, and the administration is trying to deport him by claiming he's been involved in activities contrary to U.S. foreign policy. We've, again, kind of gone over this a lot lately. But the administration is not only looking to target foreigners. This is an important point here. Terrell, the head of this anti-Semitism task force, has said that he wants to put Hamas supporters in jail and that federal hate crime indictments would be coming soon. And the administration has not defined what they mean by a Hamas supporter. It appears that by Hamas supporter, they mean someone who is opposed to what Israel is doing in Gaza and is opposed to U.S. aid to Israel. It's a very broad brush here. So Terrell told Israeli media last month, quote, "You see all these disorderly demonstrations supporting Hamas and trying to intimidate Jews. We are going to put these people in jail, not for 24 hours, but for years," end quote. So now, from what I've seen overall, this protest movement has been peaceful. Of course, there's been incidents of some vandalism. And then, there is a question of if they're occupying a college-owned building, can they be charged for a crime for that? But again, overall, everything has seemed pretty peaceful. And also, I'm sure there's been some incidents of harassment, not so much of Jewish students, but of Zionist students, of students who support Israel. I don't think people should be harassed. I think there should be an open dialogue. So, they might be able to find some instances where someone technically broke the law and then lock them up for that. And, but this is clearly being done for one reason only. It's, because think about what's happened at college campuses over the past few decades. This isn't anything really that out of the ordinary. This is being done because these people are critical of Israel, and it's just very clear. And again, they're just taking a really heavy hand here, I think, to really for the chilling effect. All right, so the next one here, Khalil speaks with attorneys for first time since his detention. This article's from JobSite News. So Mahmoud Khalil was finally able to speak with his legal team after a judge in the Southern District of New York ordered the Department of Homeland Security to allow a call of at least an hour. Prior to that, the Columbia University graduate and pro-Palestine organizer had no meaningful contact with his lawyers since Department of Homeland Security agents detained him and told him his green card has been revoked on Saturday night. Attorneys representing Khalil declined to give details of Wednesday night's call, with another planned for Thursday. Following his detention on Saturday, Khalil, who was a lead negotiator on behalf of the April 2024 Gaza encampment at Columbia University, was handcuffed and forced into an unmarked vehicle. After being initially taken to ICE's New York City field, he was taken to an ICE detention facility in New Jersey, and then he was taken to the facility where he remains today, the Central Louisiana Detention Facility. Prior to the call on Wednesday night, he was unable to call his lawyers except for a brief interrupted call on March 10th when he called his lawyer and confirmed that he was in Louisiana. So, still it looks like the judge in New York is blocking the deportation for now, and this is going to be a big case. There's going to be a lot of attention on it. He's getting a lot of lawyers trying to help him out. So we'll see how this all plays out. But I think they're going to they're trying to move really quick so they can get stuff done before they really get challenged in court with some of the stuff that they're doing here. All right, so the next one here, Florida mayor seeks to evict cinema for showing no other land. So this article's from The Guardian. So the mayor of Miami Beach is attempting to evict an independent cinema from city-owned property after it screened No Other Land, the film about Palestinian displacement in the West Bank that just won the Oscar for Best Documentary. Stephen Miner's proposal would terminate O Cinema's lease and withdraw $40,000 in promised grant funding. In a newsletter sent to residents on Tuesday, Miner condemned the film as a, quote, false one-sided propaganda attack on the Jewish people that is not consistent with the values of our city and residents, end quote. Miner had previously used the O Cinema to cancel scheduled screenings of the documentary. He always previously urged them to cancel, citing criticism from Israeli and German officials. Wow, that's amazing. According to the mayor's newsletter, O Cinema CEO Vivian Marthel allegedly agreed to withdraw the film from programming, citing concerns of anti-Semitic rhetoric, but Miner claimed she reversed her decision the following day. The screening sold out and the cinema added additional dates in March. So, again, this is an Israeli-produced film about the occupation in the West Bank. There's nothing anti-Semitic about it at all. It's made by Israeli Jews, actually. So, this just goes to show. And I mean, the obvious point here is all the people who've been talking about cancel culture in recent years, many of them are on the side of this new cancel culture that's happening. And again, it's just really ramping up. I mean, this is kind of what I feared from this stuff, this Trump administration. I mean, I know this is happening at a local level, but it just seems to be going along with everything else that's happening here. All right, so the next one here, Putin open to ceasefire with Russian conditions. So Russian President Vladimir Putin has signaled that he's open to a ceasefire in Ukraine, but that he has questions about the 30-day U.S.-Ukraine proposal that need to be discussed. Putin said, according to the New York Times, quote, the idea itself is the right one, and we definitely support it, but there are questions that we need to discuss, and I think that we need to talk them through with our American colleagues and partners, end quote. The Russian leader listed potential conditions for a 30-day truce, including a guarantee that Ukraine would not be supplied with more weapons. He said, quote, we also want guarantees that during the 30-day ceasefire, Ukraine will not conduct mobilization, will not train soldiers, and will not receive weapons, end quote. Putin also questioned who would monitor the ceasefire. He said, quote, who will determine where and who has violated a potential ceasefire agreement along a 2,000-kilometer line? Who will attribute blame for any violations? These are all questions that require thorough examination from both sides, end quote. The Russian leader said that any long-term peace deal needs to address the root causes of the war. He made the comments as U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff arrived in Russia to discuss the proposal. Yuri Uzhakov, a Kremlin official, said Witkoff would be holding a closed-door meeting with Putin. Uzhakov also said that the U.S. proposal would only give Ukraine a chance to regroup and that it would need to be adjusted to meet Moscow's interests. So he made kind of similar comments to Putin, but he said that the official Russian position was going to be formulated by Putin and laid out to Witkoff in these talks. So good that it hasn't been outright rejected. He's saying that Russia has some pretty serious conditions for a 30-day ceasefire. I mean, I'm guessing what's happened here is that Witkoff went in and Putin gave Witkoff basically his response to the U.S.-Ukraine proposal, what it would take for Russia to agree to something like that. And now Witkoff is going to go back and bring that to Trump, and then we'll see what happens from there. I think Trump, if he really wants to end this war, is going to have to work with Russia. And I think he's going to have to, Marco Rubio, he's been saying, he's Marco Rubio. He's been saying some good things about this war, about Russia in general in the last few weeks. But recently, once this proposal came out, I mean, if you look at his rhetoric, he's saying, well, if they don't accept it, then we know who the impediment to peace is. He basically saying, if they don't accept it, then it's game on, proxy war on. This is just going to continue. That's what Rubio is sounding like. So I think, it could be a negotiation tactic, but I think that is what he's thinking. So I think there's still a chance for some kind of deal to happen here. But I think it's going to take a little while. I think there's going to be a negotiation back and forth for a little while. On the other hand, you have Ukraine. Ukrainian officials are all saying we're not going to make any territorial concessions, which Russia's demands now for a peace deal are Ukraine to recognize the 4 oblasts that they annexed as Russia, Ukrainian neutrality, and things like that. And Ukraine is saying right now that it's a red line. The territorial concessions are a red line. So that is a huge sticking point, and we will see what'll happen. But I do think a negotiation will go on for a little while. Either way, either if it gets rejected, if nothing happens, or if a deal is reached. I mean, Trump has shown he's willing to cut. I mean, who knows? You know, it was only the military aid and intelligence was only paused briefly, but if he's really willing to use that as leverage over Zelensky, Zelensky's not really going to have much of a choice. All right, so the next one here, European officials mull deployments to enforce Ukraine ceasefire. This one is from Kyle Anzalone. A bloc of Western countries held a security conference to discuss their role in enforcing a future ceasefire in Ukraine. European leaders have debated troop deployments to the war-torn nation and even considered strikes on Russian forces. French President Emmanuel Macron hosted a meeting in Paris with officials from 34 nations on Tuesday, with the talks centered on how they could provide Ukraine with enough military assistance to deter Russia from breaking a ceasefire agreement. American officials were not invited to the summit. While the meetings were being held behind closed doors, Macron said that it was time to move from concept to plan to define credible security for Kiev. However, a senior Ukrainian official said the proposals were still in their early stages. The European leaders reportedly discussed a direct troop deployment to Ukraine somewhere away from the front lines, which would receive protection from Western air and naval power. And this is what Starmer has been going on about. The thing is that I just don't think this is, that's another thing. Russia has just made it clear that they don't want any kind of NATO troop deployment under NATO nations. I think they could go for like a UN peacekeeping deployment or something like that. But I just don't really know if what these European countries are even discussing is relevant at this point. Trump has said he liked this idea. I think he even suggested it, actually, according to reports from the transition period. And he claimed that Putin had no problem with it, but I just don't see this really going anywhere. All right, so the next one here, U.S. proposes a new Gaza deal amid total blockade. So the U.S. has given Israel and Hamas a new proposal for a temporary ceasefire deal for Gaza amid Israel's total blockade on aid and all other goods entering the Strip. This was first reported by Axios on Thursday. The proposal put forward by U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff, who's been a busy man. He went from Qatar to Russia. The proposal would involve a ceasefire meant to get through Ramadan and Passover, which ends on April 20th, and the resumption of aid deliveries into Gaza. Under the proposal, Hamas would release at least 5 live Israeli hostages and the remains of 9 deceased hostages on the first day of the ceasefire. During the truce, negotiations on a permanent deal would be held, and if an agreement were reached, Hamas would release the remaining hostages on the last day of the ceasefire. According to Al Jazeera, Hamas spokesman Hazem Qassem rejected the idea of an alternative ceasefire deal, saying the group is committed to what has already been agreed upon. Hamas has maintained that it wants the full implementation of the original ceasefire deal that was reached in January, which Israel has violated by imposing the total siege and refusing to enter negotiations on the second phase of the deal, which was supposed to involve an Israeli withdrawal and permanent truce. According to the Axios report, Hamas has yet to respond to the new proposal. We had the public comment from the official, but I don't know if they've responded in the negotiations. In the meantime, the situation in Gaza is getting worse for civilians living under the siege. A UN spokesman said that aid groups on the ground are being forced to ration food and that there would be more dire consequences on the ground as long as this blockade continues. We're 12 days in now. And Israel has received widespread condemnation for blocking the entry of all goods and cutting electricity into Gaza. But the U.S. has backed this move, which is a clear war crime and amounts to the collective punishment of the civilian population. All right, the next one here. Israeli drone kills 3-year-old Palestinian in Gaza City. So an Israeli quadcopter drone killed a 3-year-old Palestinian in the Shujaiya neighborhood of Gaza City, the Palestinian news agency Wafa reported on Thursday. The report identified the victim of the Israeli attack as Amjad Hazem Abed. Wafa also reported that an Israeli drone injured a woman in the northern city of Beit Hanun. So this killing of a 3-year-old, I mean, it's just a blip in the news cycle. I haven't seen it anywhere besides Wafa and then in the live updates from Al Jazeera and Middle East Eye. And it's just, this stuff just goes on and nobody is even aware of it. And, we've seen an uptick in Israeli attacks on Gaza since they imposed that total siege. It's just, again, you just don't hear about it. All right, so the next one here, the UN says Israel is using sexual violence to dominate and destroy Palestinians. This one's from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. A report published by the United Nations Human Rights Council found that Israeli security forces had engaged in systemic sexual and reproductive violence against Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank. Commission Chair Navi Pillay said, quote, "The evidence collected by the Commission reveals a deplorable increase in sexual and gender-based violence. There is no escape from the conclusion that Israel has employed sexual and gender-based violence against Palestinians to terrorize them and perpetuate a system of oppression that undermines their right to self-determination." And quote, the report says that the Commission concludes that there has been large-scale increase in sexual crimes perpetrated against the Palestinians by the Israeli security forces. It added that the Israeli security forces, quote, intended to retaliate and punish them collectively for the attacks carried out by the military wing of Hamas and other Palestinian armed groups in southern Israel on October 7th, end quote. The Commission concluded that the abusive acts were so prevalent that they were now a de facto form of the Israeli security forces' standard operating procedures toward Palestinians. It said, quote, the Commission concludes that these and other forms of sexualized torture, including rape and violence targeting the genitals, are committed with either explicit orders or an implicit encouragement by the top civilian and military leadership, end quote. It seemed like when Ben-Gvir was the head of he was the Israeli national security minister in charge of prisons, in charge of police. It seemed like he was encouraging this torture, and some of it is sexual torture that's happening in these Israeli prisons. So they say that the purpose of this, the sexual humiliation is to psychologically dominate detainees. And other UN reports have found that Israeli soldiers use sexual humiliation, beating of genitals, and rape against their Palestinian captives. Most of the abuses go unpunished, creating a culture of impunity. The UN report released on Wednesday explains that Israel has systematically shut down the maternity and reproductive centers in Gaza. It says, quote, sexual and reproductive health care facilities have been systematically destroyed across Gaza, including maternity hospitals and maternity wards of hospitals, and Gaza's main in vitro fertility clinic. Israeli authorities deliberately destroyed such healthcare facilities, rendering them non-functional, end quote. I should have given you a warning before that story that it was not very pleasant. All right, so the next one here, Syria placed under Islamist rule for 5 years. This article is from Jason. So in December, the Sunni Islamist Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, took over Syria in an internationally backed offensive. HTS was formerly known as Jabhat al-Nusra and al-Qaeda in Iraq before that. Today, their leader, Ahmed al-Shara, formerly known as Abu Muhammad al-Julani, signed a new declaration of an interim constitution. The actual constitution doesn't appear to be totally written at this point, but there is a 7-person committee appointed by the HTS to draft it, with the stipulation that the country will be placed under Islamist rule for the next 5 years, ahead of another future final constitution going into effect. The declaration places certain conditions on the constitution, including a requirement that the president of Syria must always be a Muslim, and that Islamic law will be the main source of jurisprudence. The council is made up of Shara, the interim foreign interior defense ministers, and the head of the intelligence agency, along with 2 legal experts. So it seems like it's all HTS people that came up with this here, which is not a surprise. Because what they call the interim government is pretty much just made up of Julani and his fellow HTS members. many, for all former, not, I don't know if they were all in the group when it was still Al-Qaeda, but it's made up of former Al-Qaeda guys. All right, so the next one here, Israeli defense minister says Syria occupation will continue for unlimited time. Another one from Jason here. So Israel Katz, the Israeli defense minister, is now saying that the Israeli occupation of southern Syria will go on for an unlimited time. He has made similar comments before, but he just keeps saying it, and he keeps visiting the Israeli troops in Syria. Israel has declared all of southern Syria to be a no-go zone for Syrian long-range forces and has a zone Syrian troops are not allowed in that stretches through much of the Rif Damascus governorate as well as of Quneitra, Dara, and the western part of the Suwaida governance. Katz says Israel is prepared to keep its own military in that entire area to ensure its declarations are followed. So these are significant chunks of territory here that they're saying there can't be any Syrian troops, and they don't want any long-range weapons at all, like basically south and west of Damascus. So they're really trying to take a chunk here of Syria. And the next one here, Israeli airstrike hits Damascus, one reported killed. An Israeli airstrike hit an apartment building in the Syrian capital of Damascus on Thursday, killing at least one person, according to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz acknowledged the strike, claiming the apartment building was a Palestinian Islamic Jihad command center. A PIJ source told AFP that a building belonging to the group was struck by an Israeli airstrike and that there were martyrs and wounded. Ismail Sindawi, a PIJ Palestinian Islamic Jihad representative in Syria, claimed that the building had been closed for 5 years and that nobody from the movement frequented it, and that Israel is just trying to send a message. Syria's state news agency reported that 3 civilians were wounded in the attack, including one woman. See the aftermath of the strike here. Basically destroyed this whole side of this building here. And Katz, the Israeli defense minister, said in a statement on the strike, quote, "There will be no immunity for Islamic terrorism against Israel, whether in Damascus or anywhere else. We will not allow Syria to become a threat to the state of Israel," end quote. And of course, Israel, they celebrated the regime change, the overthrow of Assad. They even took credit for it, for setting it in motion. That's how Netanyahu described it. It was a big victory for Israel, but now they got to protect themselves from this new regime. So they're going to take a chunk of Syria and keep bombing the country like before. I saw someone on Twitter, I forget who, but made the point that for like 10 years, Israel justified bombing Syria by saying it was allied with Iran. Now there's a new government that is hostile to Iran, and they're still bombing Syria. All right, so the next one here, Jack Teixeira pleads guilty to obstructing justice. So if you remember Jack Teixeira, he was the Discord leaker, the stuff that came out in 2023 about the war in Ukraine. So this article is from AP. So Jack Teixeira, the Massachusetts Air National Guard member who caused an uproar when he leaked highly classified documents about the war in Ukraine, used his court-martial Thursday to describe himself as a proud patriot and said that he was only exposing and correcting the lies perpetuated by the Biden administration. After pleading guilty to military charges of obstructing justice, the 23-year-old acknowledged that he knew his actions were illegal, but felt he needed to share the truth about how the Biden administration was misleading the public about the war in Ukraine. He said, quote, "If I saved even one American, Russian, or Ukrainian life against this senseless money grab war, my punishment was worth it," end quote. So this is a separate sentence. He's already been sentenced to 15 years in prison. For this sentence, he's getting a dishonorable discharge and no additional prison time. So he pled guilty to obstructing justice, saying that he was smashed his phone, destroyed his phone when he saw the documents first became public. So Jack Teixeira, there's nobody out there really sticking up for him because of how he put the documents out, but I have a lot of sympathy for him, and I really like what he said here. And we learned some things, and I used a lot of stuff that he published for my work, and I think he exposed a lot of things that needed to be exposing. including it confirmed that U.S. NATO Special Operations troops were in Ukraine. I mean, that's big. There were other things that basically revealed, like all leaks about wars do, that the government was lying about certain aspects of it, about a lot of it. So, he doesn't have any kind of movement behind him because he just was putting these out in a Discord chat to his friends. He seems like he was like pretty like right wing, but I don't know. I have a lot of sympathy for him. He was a kid. He got out of high school during COVID. I can't imagine like being in high school, a senior in high school during COVID. He went into the military, and I guess he was kind of jaded by some stuff and started sharing it with his friends, probably because he wanted to seem cool. See, look at this access I got, and it ended up making a difference. So I don't know. I think Jack Teixeira should be free for that. I know a lot of people probably won't agree with that, but that's how I feel about it. But he's asking for the Trump administration to review his prosecution and punishments. So again, I just don't see anybody that's really going to, stick their neck out for Jack Teixeira. All right, so that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our Viewpoints, one from John and Nisha Whitehead. When Dissent Becomes a Crime, War on Political Speech Begins. One from Ted Snyder, Ukraine agrees to a ceasefire. Could it really happen? One from Mohammed Sahimi and Amir Hassan Bouzari, how Iran quietly buttressed its pledge to not build nukes. One from Michael Bolden, Against Standing Armies and Arbitrary Power. And our spotlight from Kelly Vlahos, Kurds sign deal in Syria. Case for U.S. troops there is weaker than ever. So please go check all that out. Again, help us with our fundraiser. This is the last show for the week. I need to start telling people next weekend, March 22nd, I will be speaking at the New Jersey Libertarian Party Convention. March 22nd, it's a Saturday. I think non-party members could buy tickets for the speakers. And it's me and someone from FIRE, the civil liberties organization that's been speaking out against what the Trump administration is doing against Mahmoud Khalil. So I think it could be really interesting to hear what he has to say. So I'll get the details next week. And so if anybody's in Jersey, you don't have to be a libertarian to go. But if you are a member of the party, definitely go to the convention. But it'll be cool. It'll be in the afternoon that the speeches are. So again, that's next weekend, March 22nd. Anyway, that is it. I will be back after the weekend. I hope everybody has a good one. Thanks for listening.